30 million Americans are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and millions more are diagnosed with prediabetes, and even more unknowingly walking around with pre-diabetes. This is a chronic disease of mass proportion that is plaguing our society today, but it doesn't have to be that way. And our guest on the Alter Your Health podcast, Robby Barbaro, is tackling this epidemic head on with his nutritional education coaching program, Mastering Diabetes. I'm Dr. Benjamin Alter, and welcome to this week's episode of the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. I'm really excited to get into the meat of this conversation with Robby. But first, I want to set the stage a little bit of just how important this conversation is. I mean, diabetes, let's face it, like I said, it is plaguing our society today, but it totally does not have to be that way. And all of the people who are diagnosed with diabetes can fairly simply reverse their condition given the proper education, resources, support to do so. So that's exactly, like I said, what Robby is doing full-time in his Mastering Diabetes coaching program. And Robby himself, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And in this conversation, we tweeze out the nuances between type 1 and type 2 diabetes and blood tests that help distinguish those two conditions from each other. But when it comes down to it, the management and reversal of these conditions is achieved through the same dietary strategies, which we go in depth to discuss. But Robby was diagnosed with type 1 at age 12, and then a few years later, he stumbled upon a whole food plant-based diet that helped manage his condition much better, which he talks about in depth. And he came to, he went to school, studied at the University of Florida and graduated in 2011 and worked for Forks Over Knives for 6 years. Very cool organization. And then he turned his attention full on to the Mastering Diabetes program, which he is involved with today. So we hear a little bit more about Robby's story with diabetes and managing his condition. We tweeze out, like I said, type 1 versus type 2 diabetes, and we get into the details of how this disease can ultimately be really well managed, prevented, reversed through easy, simple nutritional strategies. So if you are living with type 2 diabetes, you're going to absolutely want to hang into this episode. And if you are hoping to prevent type 2 diabetes, similarly, tune in. And if you are seeking support, for sure go to masteringdiabetes.org and look into the online group coaching program that they offer. If you don't have diabetes but are hoping to achieve optimal health and reverse other diseases, or live your best life, you might want to look into the Alter Health group coaching program, which is designed to support anyone and everyone in accessing their fullest potential when it comes to health and life. Just another reminder, new and old listeners, take a moment, subscribe, rate, review this podcast, leave a comment, share it with friends and family, leave some feedback. It really helps me grow personally in keeping this podcast moving in the right direction. I like that critical feedback, so thank you for that. And obviously sharing with friends, family, loved ones. Let's face it, more people need to know this information, so thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it. Now let's dive into this week's conversation with Robby Barbaro. Robby, welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast.
Thank you for having me on. It's wonderful.
It's a pleasure to connect. And I know you've got a unique story and you're helping a lot of people, specifically in the context of diabetes. So would you like to just start by sharing your story when
Sure.
it comes to diabetes and everything and your healing?
Absolutely. So I have been living with type 1 diabetes for over 18 years now. So I was diagnosed January 26th of 2000. And at that point, I was 12 years old, just about to turn 13. And my family was actually quite familiar with type 1 diabetes. So I had been complaining to my mom prior to that that I was thirsty all the time. I was going to the bathroom all the time. And I'm like, I think I have type 1 diabetes, just like Steve. So my older brother also has type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed before me. And I was complaining, and my mom's like, no, don't be silly. You don't have diabetes. And eventually she was out of town. We were living in Minnesota at the time. Her and my dad were in Florida looking at homes because we were going to move to Florida. And she called to check in and say, hey, how you doing? I said, I couldn't sleep last night. I was cramping. I didn't feel good. And she's like, okay, go upstairs, test your blood glucose, and see what happens. So I tested on my brother's meter. I was well over 400. And he said right there, you have diabetes. You're supposed to be somewhere between 80 and 130 is normal. And anybody who's my age, I was young, I was thin, in the 400s is a big problem. So we went to the doctor, and they did some regular tests. And then they said, yep, you have type 1 diabetes. They sent me to the hospital. I only had to stay one night because my parents came home from Florida the next day, and we already knew what to do. And that was the beginning of living with type 1 diabetes. So for anybody who doesn't know the difference, type 1 diabetes is when your pancreas has been damaged. We don't know how, we don't know why, but the beta cells in the pancreas have been damaged. They don't produce enough insulin, and people living with type 1 are insulin dependent. We have to inject exogenous insulin to keep our blood glucose under control and to stay alive. People living with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, that's the more common form of diabetes, about 90% living with prediabetes or type 2. And those people in the beginning, in particular, are producing excess insulin. So the problem in their case is insulin not being used properly. And they're living with insulin resistance being the cause of those conditions. Type 1 and type 1.5 diabetes, yes, we live with insulin resistance as well, but it's not the cause of our condition. And we can't reverse it like we can reverse the other forms of diabetes. So I was now 12 years old, living with type 1 diabetes, insulin dependent, and I always took good care of myself. I was on top of it. I was on top of the diabetes management aspect. My parents made sure I had the best medical care that we possibly could have. And living in Minnesota, we would drive to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and I would do complete checkups there with a nutritionist, an endocrinologist, a dietitian, psychologist, the whole works. And never in that time did anybody talk about following a healthier diet. It was really the mainstream teaching of, hey, a child or a teenager gets diagnosed with type 1, we want to make sure that they feel like they can still be normal, that they can still live a normal life. And that's what I was taught. So standard American diet, I was following prior to my diagnosis, continued to follow it after my diagnosis. And my overall health wasn't great. As a teenager, I was taking allergy medications all the time. I had plantar fasciitis, so I'd wear these big blue boots at night. I had to get warts lasered off my feet on a regular basis. And in my adolescence, I started to develop serious acne. And I tried every medication you could think of, and even went on to try Accutane, which is one of the most serious drugs you can possibly take for acne. I did that. And it wasn't until I started making dietary changes that my overall health improved. And I saw also a lot of improvements in my diabetes health as well. So part of my journey is learning this seed being planted in my mind that maybe it's possible to reverse type 1 diabetes. And that's what really transformed my life. And that's what set me on this path to try and learn as much as I could and try anything I possibly could that would give my body an improved chance of healing itself. So that's my vision. That's my plan. I absolutely believe it's going to happen. I'll figure it out. We as a type 1 diabetes community, we will figure it out, a way to heal type 1 diabetes naturally through our own internal healing. So,
wow, love the intention.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I try, doing that, I started just learning as much as I could. I tried the Weston A. Price Foundation diet. I tried a Gabriel Cousens sort of plant-based ketogenic diet, the phase 1 program where you're eating just mainly fat from nuts and seeds, oils, and then lots of greens. And then eventually now I've come to the fruit-based world, eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet where I eat my calories predominantly from fruit. And the big difference between all my experiences of trying different diets is that it's the fruit-based version that has led to the highest level of insulin sensitivity, and the overall best health. Like my energy, my
Hmm.
skin, been the best it's ever been since following this program. It's been over 12 years now, eating nothing but fruits, leafy greens, and non-starchy vegetables. It's all I've eaten for 12 years. And as a person living with type 1 diabetes, I'm, showcasing a lot on social media as much as I can, just sharing my story. People are flabbergasted by the insulin sensitivity that this program leads to. So the amount of insulin I'm injecting for the amount of carbohydrate I'm consuming blows people away, but really it's actually just normal if this is what people start to do.
Awesome. Definitely want to dive into some of the details concerning more of the science and logistics behind what you're doing and how you're doing it. But I want to go back to the diagnosis and, having the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. So from the conventional standpoint, there's absolutely nothing that you can do nutritionally or otherwise to treat this condition. It's really just management. Is that correct?
So for type 1 diabetes and type 1.5 diabetes, it's accurate to say that yes, management is what is taught. And to a certain extent,
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, even to this day, like what I'm doing with this low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, I don't have a solution. Like I can't teach people this is how you can reverse the type 1 diabetes or type 1.5. We teach, excellent management skills, which leads to overall health and reduces your chances of the complications associated with all forms of diabetes, including type 1.
Mhm. And the conventional approach is obviously managing with medications, with exogenous insulin. And with your approach, you're still managing and you still have some exogenous insulin, but it's managed much more optimally and your overall health is improved. That's what I'm
Yes,
hearing you say.
absolutely. That's 100%
Yeah.
true. And one thing I just like to clarify, if anybody's listening to this and they have type 1 diabetes or they know somebody, they might be interested in some of these nuances. But one thing people get confused about, particularly in the world of type 1 diabetes, is that less insulin equals better health, or less insulin equals higher insulin sensitivity. And that is not 100% true. You have to equate the carbohydrate consumption. So people who are doing a ketogenic diet, particularly in the type 1 diabetes world, they get what looks like incredible results from the outside world. And I saw this in my own body. You end up taking the least amount of insulin you probably will ever take when you follow a low carbohydrate, ketogenic high fat diet. And the reason is because you're not eating carbohydrates. Therefore, you
Yeah.
need less total insulin, but your insulin sensitivity is not so good. So when I was doing the Gabriel Cousens style approach, I would have roughly 30 grams of total carbohydrate per day, and I would inject a total of about 10 units. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio, carbohydrate to insulin ratio, 3-to-1. Now I'm eating over 750 grams of carbohydrate on many days. Yesterday, I know I actually ate well over 750 grams of carbohydrate and injecting roughly, I think yesterday was about 33 units of insulin. So you do the math. Now we're talking about insulin sensitivity more like 20-to-1, 22-to-1 in that ballpark range. So,
Wow.
and again, people living with insulin-dependent diabetes, where your pancreas is not producing its own insulin, our goal is to live a lifestyle where you need to inject the same amount of insulin your body would have normally secreted. So trying to get down to some super low number that's not physiologically normal before you became a person living with diabetes is not really a healthful way to look at life. It would only make sense is if you knew while that number was going down, you were simultaneously beginning to produce your own insulin. In that case, then lower and lower and lower and lower would be good. But that's not what's happening. So a lot of people in the world of type 1 diabetes in particular are getting confused about that. And again, it's a nuance because in the world of type 2 diabetes, we do want less and less and less and less insulin down to zero, because in that case, those people are now using their internal insulin, the insulin they're producing in their own body to manage their blood glucose. That's what we want. So that's why that gets a little confusing for some people.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for tweezing apart those nuances. And on that note, could you go into some of the more nuances that regarding type 1 versus 1.5 and type 2? Because I know that in it used to be very cut and clear. Type 1 is juvenile onset, type 2 is adult onset. And obviously we know that today there's plenty of juveniles, youth, who are developing type 2 diabetes. So could you tweeze apart 1 versus 1.5 versus 2?
Absolutely. So the way I like to think about it is there's two types of diabetes. There is, I'll pick up an article real quick just so I can give a few of the exact numbers.
Great. Yeah. Take your time.
Okay. So there's two forms of diabetes. There's insulin dependent and then there's non-insulin dependent. And that's really the way to think about it in regards to, reversing diabetes versus doing excellent management. And so people living with insulin dependent diabetes, those are type 1.5, type 1, and then a type 2 who has an exhausted pancreas. Okay. And then non-insulin dependent diabetes, that's going to be pre-diabetes, and that's going to be people living with type 2 diabetes that are producing plenty of their own insulin still. And you could technically put gestational diabetes in that category as well, but we're not going to really talk about that today.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole different ballgame for gestational diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're right. Initially, type 1 was called juvenile, and then type 2 was called adult onset. And then now we're starting to see young children become so overweight, so obese, that they are becoming a non-insulin dependent type 2 diabetic. We're seeing that all too often right now. And it's really just comes down to lifestyle. It's as simple as that. So when you get into the nuances of how do you diagnose one or the other, that's when we start to look at a C-peptide test, and we look at an antibody test, a diabetes antibody panel. So a C-peptide test, what that does is that's going to indicate how much insulin somebody's pancreas is producing. And so insulin and C-peptide are produced in a 1-to-1 ratio. They simply break off. C-peptide stays in your body much longer, so it's easier to test than to try and test insulin. So we can see how much insulin you're producing based on the C-peptide. And so if there's another way to test this, you could do a stimulated C-peptide test. And that's where you eat a high carbohydrate meal, then you get your C-peptide tested, and then that will tell you how well your body is able to produce insulin in response to a carbohydrate challenge. So that you want to look for, it'd be a higher number in that case, and that gives us more information. But at the end of the day, all forms of these diabetes, what we're actually going to do, the treatment protocol is going to be the same. It's a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet. Maybe somebody needs a little bit of insulin, maybe they don't. We have a lot of people come to us who have been misdiagnosed as living with type 2, and really they're more like a type 1.5. And again, we find that out by doing the C-peptide test. If we find out that their insulin production is compromised, then it's a really, really easy solution that, okay, you know what? You have to decide. Do you want to live on this edge of like being careful not to eat too much food so you can keep your blood glucose under control? Or you're like, you know what? I'm realizing that my pancreas isn't producing sufficient quantities of insulin. I'm going to be okay with injecting a little bit. So it's actually happening more and more frequently, but it's a little weird limbo area because type 1, it's just complete insulin production is gone. There's no questions asked. We have to inject insulin. We don't have a choice. But there is this interim category of, and again, we don't know the cause. So the technical or medical understanding is that these are autoimmune conditions, and that the body is mistakenly attacking its own beta cells or insulin, and therefore there's just insulin production is not sufficient. And so with type 1.5, the technical teaching is that it's happening at a slow rate, slowly, and eventually they get worse and worse and worse, and then eventually you'll need insulin, living more like a type 1. Whereas when somebody gets diagnosed with type 1, it happens rapidly. Your insulin production is just obliterated. So that's some of the differences there. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. So if someone's living with type 2 diabetes for a long period of time, not very well managed, they're still pumping out a lot of insulin and whatnot, could they get to the point where they are no longer pumping out insulin and they become insulin dependent?
Yes, like so it's very possible. No question. So when people are living with insulin resistance for an extended period of time, what ends up happening is your body's ability to take glucose out of the bloodstream and into your body's cells is inhibited. In your body's like, and because it's not working, basically you have like a key lock that's gummed up. So imagine insulin is the key that opens the door so glucose can go into the cell. Now, if that's not working properly and the lock is gummed up, your body ends up trying to produce more and more insulin just to try and overcompensate this issue, to kind of like bulldoze through a wall essentially. And at some point, your pancreas gets tired and the beta cells they start to die off. And it's not because there's any antibodies or there's anything like that going on. It's just literally an exhausted pancreas. But the good news is, even in some of those cases with diminished insulin production, even that smaller amount that your body can still produce can be enough. So if you start optimizing your lifestyle and you maximize your insulin sensitivity, even though your insulin production has been diminished, you can still potentially have normal blood glucose, eat a healthy diet, and not need any diabetes medications.
Boom. Yeah. Powerful. So I want to kind of shift this discussion to type 2 diabetes, if that's all right. I know that type 1 is your, what you're living with, but type 2 is certainly, affecting more and more people in our world today. Could we talk about the conventional dietary guidelines for a second when it comes to type 2 diabetes management?
Yes.
If you can do so without getting your blood boiling, like
Sure.
what happens to me sometimes.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. So you're looking at something like the American Diabetes Association. Their guidelines are very much in the middle ground. They're not saying do a super low carbohydrate diet or do ketogenic. They're not saying do a high carbohydrate diet. They're right in the middle. It's very standard American diet. Nothing
eat this balanced thing,
Absolutely.
Carbs, fats, protein, and yeah.
And the bottom line is nothing special happens. You don't see the American Diabetes Association or people who follow that diet going around on the internet saying there's sensational results or publishing research on it. It's just keep doing what caused the disease in the first place. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's very few adjustments and nothing special happens.
And when you do that, then you get to take medication, and then you get to pay the drug companies a lot of money, and you go get to your annual visits, and everyone's, everything's hunky dory. Everyone's, status quo. And
The ADA's official position is that it's a chronic disease that just progresses and there's no solution. And then we know that's not true.
Yeah. So, all right, that was quick. That was quick. So we know that's not true. So what is the truth? How do we best manage and reverse diabetes? Let's get into it.
Yeah. So the bottom line is, if you asked any person living with diabetes and you gave them a bowl of brown rice, or you said, here's a couple bananas, they're going to say one of two things. They're going to say, I have to eat a very small amount of that. I have to be careful. Can't eat too much. Or I can't eat it at all. It's too many carbohydrates. I can't eat those foods. That's what people are going to say. And what I'm here to tell you is that what anybody living with diabetes should say if they wanted to maximize their insulin sensitivity and reverse prediabetes, reverse type 2 diabetes, is that I am going to eat as much of those foods as my heart desires until I am full. Until I'm comfortably satiated, I will eat as much as I want of brown rice, of potatoes, of bananas, all those foods. And that is the solution to diabetes. I know it sounds crazy, but eating carbohydrate-rich foods is the solution. And here's why. So again, we're going to talk mainly focusing on prediabetes and type 2 diabetes right now. These are situations where the person living with those are producing plenty of their own insulin, all right? So let's go back and just revisit the insulin resistance conversation. So they're producing plenty of insulin. The reason their blood glucose is high is because they are having trouble taking glucose out of their bloodstream and into their cells. And the reason is because they have fat stored inside their muscle and liver cells. And it's that fat that's inside the cell that is preventing insulin from opening the door and letting in the blood glucose. So as soon as we start to optimize our lifestyle, where you are now removing that fat, So first off, you're not eating too much of it. So if you stop eating too much of it, now your body can start getting rid of it. And this is, you start seeing weight loss, and you start seeing, but weight loss is an important component, but there's also a lot to say about just not eating high fat foods, lowering the fat in the diet, and not losing weight has been shown in peer-reviewed research to still reverse insulin resistance. So it's not 100% due to the weight loss. Weight loss helps, is certainly part of the process of reversing insulin resistance. But simply stopping the high fat food consumption, even if you're not losing weight, begins the process of this fat leaving cells where it's not supposed to be. And that is the process of reversing insulin resistance. That is reversing the cause of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And these conditions can be completely reversed. The high blood glucose is just a symptom. That's not the actual disease. Insulin resistance is the disease in both situations. So again, people are afraid of the brown rice, of the bananas, of potatoes for good reason, because they have had the personal experience of trying to eat some bananas, trying to eat a bowl of rice, and seeing their blood glucose skyrocket. And they say, Robby, how can you possibly tell me that it's not the carbohydrates that were the problem? I just ate 2 bananas and my blood glucose is 300. How in the world can you tell me that did not cause the problem? And I get the logic, I get where they're coming from, but what they're missing is that component of why their body is not capable of taking that glucose from the foods they ate into their cells, and it's because they have too much fat. It was the fat that they ate prior, it was the fat that they ate the days before, it's the fat they've been eating for years before that has accumulated and led to this problem. It was not the fruit, it's not the potatoes, it's not the intact whole grains. Those foods are not the problem. And so once people get this clear and they start implementing the program that we teach at Mastering Diabetes, we say low fat, we're talking a maximum of 15% of the calories from fat per day, or another way to look at that is no more than 30 grams of total fat per day. If people start to follow that guideline, they will see their insulin sensitivity improve very quickly, very quickly. We do retreats, and in 4 days where we feed, we control everything they're eating for the entire 4-day period, we see people getting off metformin. We see people reducing their insulin, definitely getting off sulfonylureas like glipizide, medications like that. And they've increased their carbohydrate consumption. So we're seeing people increase their carbohydrate consumption, decrease their medications, and see better blood glucose readings. That is crystal clear, classic insulin sensitivity.
Powerful stuff. So this whole idea of the fat inside the muscle cells and the liver cells, the intramyocellular lipotoxicity, that whole idea is obviously not the conventional theory or viewpoint when it comes to diabetes, correct? Because if it were, then the conventional guidelines would be, all right, let's get rid of the fat inside the cells and let's increase insulin sensitivity. So what is the conventional theory when it comes to diabetes?
Yeah, that's a great question. What does the American Diabetes Association say is the cause of type 2 diabetes? I mean, that's the question you're asking here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they have a stated cause. I think they certainly acknowledge that obesity is a problem. Mm-hmm. But I really don't think they have a stated cause.
I guess that
it's mind blowing. I mean, when you know this and you see the results and you read the research and then you see what's happening in the mainstream media and mainstream recommendations, it truly is mind boggling. It doesn't make sense. You sit there and scratch your head and it's like, what is going on?
Well, it kind of does make sense because they're, in the conventional context, they're rarely looking at the cause of disease. They're mainly symptom management. But, from my perspective as, more of a naturopathic holistic doctor, I'm always looking like, what's the cause of the disease? Because if we don't know the cause, how the heck can we reverse the disease?
Absolutely.
But since type 2 diabetes is a condition of high blood sugar, hyperglycemia, that's how it's diagnosed. That's how our lab tests show how well we're managing it with the A1C and the, random blood sugar, then it makes complete sense to say, all right, high blood sugar, cut the sugar out. It's
Right.
just like, it's very
Yeah.
elementary thinking, but it makes a lot of sense.
And it's unfortunate because you see a lot of people, again, I understand the confusion that a lot of people are in right now, because you'll see really well-respected medical doctors, even in the alternative community, publishing this ketogenic books and all this stuff. They have their best-selling books. They have their own success stories. It's very confusing. And one of the common misconceptions is people think something like the glucose or the sugars in a mango is the same as table sugar. And people are equating them, and that's just not true. What we are talking about is whole plant foods. So when you eat a whole mango, you're getting a lot of water, a lot of fiber, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals, and nutrients we have yet to discover in a combination that we don't fully understand. The mystery of how the whole body operates, what we're learning about the gut biome, a lot of this stuff is really beyond our comprehension. So eating the whole foods is really the best thing you can do to ensure nutritional excellence. And they're, again, not the same as table sugar, and they don't metabolize in the body the same way, and the blood glucose response is not the same. So it's very sad to see that amount of confusion out there. And we're just very fruit friendly at Mastering Diabetes. It is a truly healing food.
Totally. Yeah, it is. I've heard some doctors compare, a banana to a bag of Skittles, and it's like, really, buddy?
Yeah, it's sad. And again, what's also sad is that people are not doing a good job of citing research. Like, somebody would need to show some research to back that up. Let's show a study where people were fed a bunch of whole bananas, and then what happened? And they're really just extrapolating and making things up in a lot of cases. When you do look at the research and see, okay, what happens when people increase their fruit consumption, there's really nothing but benefits that occur.
Yeah. So that leads me to ask, the difference when it comes to fruits and vegetables, because you said earlier, when it comes to your personal management of your type 1 diabetes, you eat fruits and low starch vegetables and greens. Correct. Predominantly. Correct. So type 2 diabetes, though, I know you mentioned the brown rice and the potatoes and, these high carbohydrate vegetables, starchy vegetables, as being real important staples when it comes to reversing type 2 diabetes. So can you kind of tweeze out the fruits and the veggies?
Yeah. So we've created a very simple program at Mastering Diabetes. We have green light, yellow light, and red light foods. So in the green light category, and everything is listed in a particular order. So green light foods are fruits, starchy vegetables, legumes, intact whole grains, and then we move into non-starchy vegetables, leafy greens, herbs, and spices. So the first 4 categories of food that were listed there, those are the calorie-providing foods. And that's important because in order to have long-term success on a plant-based diet, people must learn how to eat sufficient quantities of calories. A lot of people, they dive into the program, they start eating lots of salads, they use willpower to get through a certain amount of time, but they're not eating enough food because they're still afraid of carbohydrate-rich food.
Totally.
Eventually, they get low energy, they get hungry, they go and eat something that they're trying not to eat, such as a burger or some processed vegan food or anything like that. And all of a sudden they get energy because they just got a bunch of calories that they have been missing. And they think, oh, the diet didn't work for me. So we are adamant about teaching the importance of consuming calorie-dense green light foods. So again, fruits, starchy vegetables, those are potatoes, butternut squash, yams. Then we go into legumes, that's beans, that's lentils, that's peas. Then we go into intact whole grains. So we're talking about brown rice there, millet, spelt, stuff like that. Those four categories of food, people can eat any one they want, and they can eat as many of those 4 or as little of those 4. Like, so I like fruit. It's just a personal preference thing. So it's all the same program. And if somebody's living with type 2 diabetes, they could eat exactly the way I eat, or they could eat no fruit if they wanted to. They could eat potatoes, lots of potatoes, and they could eat lots of legumes and lots of intact whole grains, and they don't want fruit. They don't have to have fruit. It's just any combination of green light foods that meets your caloric requirements is going to lead to reversing insulin resistance. No questions.
So when it comes to your specific diet, that's because just you like fruit and
I love
you
fruit.
prefer fruit over potatoes.
True, exactly.
Yeah,
And I live in a location, I live in Southern California in Santa Monica, where I have access to incredible fruit and I just personally love it. So that's what I eat.
got it. But you would be, in terms of your insulin sensitivity and your management of your condition, do you think you would be just as well off if you ate some fruit and some potatoes?
So, based on the experience that we have had with hundreds of clients who are living with type 1 diabetes and have been through our program, the answer is yes. Those
Mhm.
excellent insulin sensitivity. Um, we do see that there's a little bit of an improvement in insulin sensitivity with people who eat more fruit, but it's very minor. It's really not even worth that much of a discussion.
Mhm.
But the bottom line is any combination of these green light foods leads to excellent insulin sensitivity, no questions asked.
Mhm. Yeah, because I know, fruit obviously has more fructose than vegetables, and
Correct.
fructose doesn't require insulin to be taken out into the cells. So is that one of the reasons why you think that?
It definitely helps,
Yeah. So it's like free energy,
essentially.
free energy. Yeah. And then when it comes to the yellow light foods, is that like nuts and seeds and
Yes. So
what
yellow
else?
light is
Yeah.
where we're telling people that it's to be careful. So again, the diet is low fat, plant based, whole foods. So everything that is listed in that green light category fits that low fat, plant based, whole foods, not processed. Now, yellow light, you can have things like nuts and seeds, avocado, coconut meat, olives, certain fruits like durian is a higher fat fruit. These are foods that are on. They're all whole plant foods, and they're delicious. They're nutritious, but they're not low in fat. So we're not telling people to exclude them. We're telling people that you want to be careful and cognizant of how much of those foods you're including in your diet because you'll easily exceed the fat guidelines if you just go to town on any of those foods. Whereas in the green light category, you can genuinely eat as much as you want. They are full of so much water, so much fiber. It's very, very difficult to eat too much.
Mhm.
And another thing we have in the yellow light category is certain breads, such as Ezekiel bread, sprouted grain breads. These are good. They're very clean. They can be incorporated into a diet to reverse insulin resistance, but they're significantly higher on the calorie density scale, and they can inhibit somebody's weight loss. So we want to be careful with those. And then processed pastas. So there are things like brown rice pasta. There's bean pastas these days. There's quinoa pastas, all kinds of pastas. These are good, very healthy food, especially since when they're cooked, they're absorbing the water content. So the overall calorie density of those foods is actually quite similar to the original grain in most cases, but it's still, we're just adamant about advocating whole foods and
Mhm.
really just eating things that aren't processed, just as nature provided. That's why we put those in the yellow light category.
Mhm. So I should tell you, Robbie, that I first came across you from Medical Medium, and
Cool.
you were on like his website or he posted something about you or something, and so that's I was following him and kind of I've read his books and stuff and really into what he puts out, and then I came across you and I thought, oh, this guy, yeah, they're speaking the same language here. I'm curious what your thoughts are of Medical Medium. I know you guys have some connection and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, first off, I think the guy is very inspiring.
Yeah.
What he's doing, and he is changing so many lives. It's really sensational. And I got to say, I'm quite grateful to the work he's doing. Um, his teaching that autoimmunity is not what people think it is, that's potentially life changing. I can't necessarily prove that at this point with science. Everything we teach at Mastering Diabetes is evidence based. So I can't really say that I know for sure what he's saying is 100% true. I believe it. I personally do believe it. Um, and him teaching, people like me living with what's classified as an autoimmune condition, to give us a new way of looking at it and say, no, your body is never attacking itself. It's not confused. It's not destroying your own cells. that the reason you have antibodies is because they are attacking a virus. The virus is what's doing the damage. The virus is the problem, not your own body, not your body getting confused. That's game changing. And that is definitely a belief that I'm holding on to and using in my efforts to continue healing type 1 diabetes. So I'm super grateful. He's the first person I've ever heard say that. So that's new information he's brought to the world, and that's fantastic. And, essentially, he came out with his book, his first book. He has a 28-day cleanse. I mean, I've essentially been doing the 28-day cleanse for 12 years now. So, we're on the same page there. And you look in his books, all the foods he's recommending are same things we're recommending in Master Diabetes. These are plant foods. And he's just doing a really good job of expanding, upon their benefits and why they're good for you and what they do. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think when it comes to autoimmunity, especially, a lot of people have this belief system running that their body is letting them down. And I think that having that belief is really suppressing the immune system even further. These negative thoughts, negative beliefs, my body's letting me down. But reframing things and having this alternative perspective, that really resonates with me personally, similarly, and how the body can't do that. It's not possible for the body to not heal. The body's always healing. All these symptoms are are messages of health. So yeah, it really resonates with me as well. Back to the yellow light foods. Got thrown off track for a little bit. The more fatty fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, I guess vegetable would be avocado. Could you explain, in your experience, how you have arrived at the 15% fat level? What happens when you get more than that?
So there's a lot of research, people like Walter Kempner, James W. Anderson, Nathan Pritikin, Neil Barnard, T. Colin Campbell, a lot of these experts who've been working with patients in metabolic wards and in their normal practice, seeing that, again, in the research, diets less than 15% of calories from fat got the most extraordinary results. And we see that over and over again. And we also see that when people simply eat whole foods as nature provided, foods that are easily accessible, that's just where the percent of this falls around there. Just automatically falls roughly closer to 10%. Saying 50% is adding a little bit more of a grace in there. So it sort of just comes from the peer-reviewed research, the people who got the best results. And then it comes from also the logic of, okay, these are the healthiest foods that we see over and over and over again. When you eat a diet of predominantly those foods without any processing, what ends up being the calories? People are shocked to see how much fat they get from whole foods. So there's fat in bananas, there's fat in raspberries, there's fat in lettuce. So if you eat enough calories, you essentially get enough fat automatically. You don't have to seek out any particular high fat food. And again, personal experience here. We don't make our recommendations on personal experience, but it's worth it to add it. I have had my omega-3s tested on 2 different occasions and then analyzed during our 2018 Mastering Diabetes Online Summit. And then this year, we did it again in the 2019 Mastering Diabetes Online Summit. And my results are sensational. My omega-3 profile is better than almost everybody that many plant-based doctors see. So I have like I think it's 8.2%. And most doctors are seeing that omega-3 number between 2 and 5 or 6%, even when they're supplementing with people. And I don't consume any additional flax seeds or chia seeds. I rarely eat nuts and seeds, and my avocado consumption is low. I've also done that same test where I had 0 overt fat for many, many years when I first was doing this diet, and my results were sensational. So again, it really just comes down to the peer-reviewed research and the numbers when running, how much fat is in whole foods. That's where the recommendation comes from. And we can also see, again, with some more anecdotal evidence, people living with type 1 diabetes, we have an easy way to objectively understand what's happening with our insulin sensitivity. And the reason it's easy for us is because we're injecting insulin we calculate our carbohydrate consumption, and we measure our blood glucose. Those three pieces of information allow us to easily and quickly see how insulin sensitive are we. So if I eat a half an avocado or a whole avocado in a day, I immediately see that I need more insulin and my blood glucose is harder to control. And we see that repeatedly with our clients for sure. If they have a slip up or a bad day or something, they go and eat a cake or whatever, immediately they need way more insulin, harder to manage their blood glucose. So it's just sort of through evidence in that, anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, I think it's super cool that it sounds like you've got this ongoing experiment running in your body. It's like your body is a laboratory and you've got this, glucose monitor that's giving you this constant feedback. And it's allowing you to really become a mastering this diabetes thing. Super
Absolutely.
Cool.
A lot of data. Now that today's we have continuous glucose monitors. So we see our blood glucose every 5 minutes. You can see the curve after a meal. And all that data is helpful.
I'm curious if you have yourself personally, or if you know of any others in the diabetes community who have symptoms of, lower high blood sugar. Do you feel, because you've got that, biofeedback kind of device on you, do you feel like, oh, my blood sugar is a little high right now? Oh, my blood sugar is a little low.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody living with type 1 will say that, yes, you feel when you're low, you feel when you're high. The device is just helpful. But
what are those feelings?
When I feel low, you definitely feel much more lethargic. Just, tired, sometimes shaky if you get really low. And then when I'm high, like the feeling I get is it's almost like there's pressure inside my body. It's a weird, hard to describe, but it's like this internal pressure and things just don't feel right. And that's when I know it's time to inject some more insulin to fix the problem.
Yeah, because I know that a lot of people living with type 2 diabetes, they've got reactive hypoglycemia where they have high blood sugar and then they come back down to normal. And they don't necessarily have hypoglycemia, but they might have symptoms of that.
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they're used to being high, this happens a lot with people with type 2. Yeah. When they actually are in range and their blood glucose is good, they feel low. They feel shaky, feel tired. And that's just a period of adjusting and learning how to recalibrate what actually is healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting stuff. So could you tell us a little bit more about the Mastering Diabetes program, what that looks like? I know it's group coaching based.
Yes.
And what kind of, what's the format of it? What kind of stuff do you guys cover?
We're super proud of our coaching program.
Yeah, because sorry, go ahead.
I worked at Forks Over Knives for 6 years as we released the movie, came out with books, and published a lot of content on the website. And it was a lot of fun. And we were changing a lot of lives. It was really beautiful. But what I realized was that if anybody was living with diabetes in particular, and they needed support and guidance on a day-by-day basis, there was nowhere to go. There wasn't one resource to get that nitty-gritty day-to-day coaching from somebody who really knows this condition, has a lot of experience working with clients, and could also provide a group for people to learn from. So Cyrus and I set out to create this. We created Mastering Diabetes. We provide a lot of education. We do our yearly summit. We do a lot of free education via our podcast, Instagram, YouTube, blog articles, all that stuff. But the main thing we do is we are an online coaching practice. And we help people living with any form of diabetes transition from any diet to a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet to maximize their insulin sensitivity. Now, we have 3 different tools in our coaching program. The first tool is we built an online course, and it has a bunch of videos and PDFs to walk people through the transition one step at a time. It can be very overwhelming. There's so much to change. People get scared, and we are committed to helping people make long-term lasting change. And that's by changing one thing at a time. So the course has been really meticulously designed for long-term success, making one change at a time. So we're going to change breakfast first, learn some of the science, then move on to lunch, learn a little bit more science, then dinner, then we're talking about intermittent fasting, exercise. We have a tool called the decision tree, which helps people make smart decisions with regards to their diabetes health based on the medications they're using, the exercise they're doing and the foods they're eating. And then we also have lots of recipes, grocery shopping tips, navigating social situation tips, how to find a doctor, a lot of nuanced stuff towards the end of the course. But it's very thorough and, again, designed to go one step at a time. Then the second tool we provide is we do a forum, a community forum. People can do that through Facebook. So if they're not a Facebook user, we also have an online forum inside the online course, and they can ask us questions of us and our coaches. And we have 3 great coaches in the program right now. So Kylie Buckner, who's a registered nurse for over 20 years, a lot of experience working with diabetes. Then we have Adam Sudd and Mark Ramirez. These are 2 people that themselves have completely reversed type 2 diabetes. So you have that experience of Cyrus and myself talking about type 1, 2 people who reversed type 2, and then we have a registered nurse. So we have a really strong coaching team. And anytime a question is asked, we answer that question within 24 hours. So you really know that we're there with you every step of the way, no matter what's popping up. Why is my blood glucose high? Is it time to adjust medications? We can help guide you through talking to your doctor, finding the right people to consult with, and giving you our experience, what we've seen other people do, what our plant-based doctors also do in various situations, what we've learned from them. So there's a lot of guidance there. And then there's a lot of community support. So you ask that question, hey, when's it time to lower my metformin? And then somebody in the group pops in and says, hey, here's what I did. Here's how I got off my metformin. So you're really getting support from people who've most likely run into the same problem you've run into. And whenever you're having a bad day or you just slipped up and you're feeling bad, you're just something's going wrong. And as long as somebody's willing to post and communicate and be vulnerable, the group just comes out and supports. Like, it's just unbelievable. Those posts end up getting the most interaction. People love to help, love to support. It's very uplifting. So I really, really am proud of what we have in our community forum area. And then we do live Q&A calls. So the first and third Sunday, we use Zoom, just like we're using right here. And we do a live Q&A call. Me or Cyrus and then some other coaches are on that call. And we answer questions in real time. So it's nice to look people in the eye and talk to them. And any question that needs some more in-depth interaction back and forth, we're there to answer it. And we have a lot of people just sharing their success. They love to just hop on the call and be like, hey, I just want to tell you guys, this is what's happening to me. I've gone from 100 units of insulin to 0 units of insulin. I'm off my blood pressure meds. I'm off my cholesterol meds, all this stuff. It's really fun. So that's uplifting as well. And we do that for a very, very affordable. So right now, if somebody wants to join our coaching program for an entire year, it's $399. And I actually pay my endocrinologist more than that just for a 15-minute appointment. Like $450 an hour, or $450, not almost $450 an hour, but it's like $450 for the appointment.
That's less, 15 minutes or less, yeah.
And I'm not getting any ongoing support or anything like that. So people can usually earn that money back just by saving on healthcare costs. But
oh, absolutely,
their quality of life is also,
it's priceless.
Put a price on.
Yeah, priceless information. Yeah, so, it's just amazing to me how crystal clear the answers are when it comes to nutrition and lifestyle for, we're obviously talking about diabetes, but this conversation could be focusing on any number of conditions. It's just crystal clear how simple and straightforward it is to prevent and reverse. And I'm curious, some of your last thoughts when it comes to, why things are a little less than clear for the general public. And on that note, what is a message that you might have to kind of clarify or inspire anyone living with diabetes or any other chronic condition?
Yeah, so my message is to absolutely just start. I think the biggest problem is a lot of people get overwhelmed and it's very scary. So just start, get going, and find people to communicate with, whether it's our coaching program or another coaching program. I don't know if you do coaching or not, but work with somebody, get that help and do it one step at a time. Get started, and it's just gonna get better and better and better. And once you get some results, you start getting motivated and the snowball starts to just roll, and it's really fun. So that's my takeaway message there. And I think the confusion really just comes from the financial interest. I think that's really the end of the day. You have a lot of very powerful food corporations, pharmaceutical companies who are invested in having people be confused and not really actually sure what to eat. So I think that's part of the problem. But again, the take-home message is to start making changes, because once you experience them in your own body, there is no longer any confusion. So people living with diabetes, they're confused. They're like, oh man, I don't know about what they're saying, those carbohydrates, that scares me. And that's okay to be scared. Just see it as an experiment. And once it happens in your own body, when you start eating all the fruit you want, all the squashes you want, all the beans you want, all the millet or quinoa you want, and you start seeing your blood glucose come down, less medication, losing weight if you need to lose weight, it doesn't matter what any doctor says. It doesn't matter what you read on the internet. There's no longer any more confusion. What we are saying is happening in your body, and you know the truth. 100%, no questions asked. It will work. You just got to get started.
Awesome, Robbie. Love it. And yes, we do coaching at Alter Health. You do coaching at Mastering Diabetes. You know, anyone listening out there, you are supported. And there is, I think it's such a great message that there is tons of people in this world who are coming into this path, and you're supported in doing so. And thank you, Robbie, for being such a beacon of light and support for so many. And really appreciate this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope this helps a lot of people.
It is already. Peace and love until next time.